Hi, everybody. I'm John Chrastka, Executive Director for EveryLibrary and the EveryLibrary Institute. This is EveryLibrary Live, Banned Books Week 2024 edition. We're here today for a very special conversation with the EveryLibrary National Ambassador for 2023-2024, Julia Quinn. I'm thrilled to be able to welcome Julia today and have a chat about reading, a lot about libraries, about censorship. I mean, it is Banned Books Week after all. The chance to have this entire festival this week is very important to us because of two things. One, it's Banned Books Week. We have to have big conversations, I think, with Americans about the American way of life. Censorship is an affront to that American way of life. And how do we get around what's going on right now? How do we get past this point in a very weird part of American history? And to lift up the communities that are currently going through censorship and going through book bans and try and bring a new sense of solidarity and some supports to them. Here at EveryLibrary, we are the Political Action Committee for Libraries. We do work around public policy, tax policy, censorship, discrimination, and we do it with the support of good human beings from around the country like yourselves, our listeners, and Julia Quinn's support as well as our national ambassador, among everybody else who's been on this wonderful week so far. If you are in a place where you want to try and do something about the censorship crisis, the book ban crisis, these campaigns of erasure that are going on, I would ask you to take a look at our Fight for the First campaign. The Fight for the First campaign platform is set up so that if there's a crisis going on in a library around the right to read, around to have your stories heard and told, you can come to the site. We can help set you up real fast, and we can start talking about these issues in your local community. Sometimes it's one zip code. It's oftentimes one school district. And the work that we do across that Fight for the First initiative is donor supported. I'm asking you to take a look, especially after you're done listening to a wonderful conversation today, to take a look and see if you want to put a few dollars to that effort. everylibrary.org/2024. It goes right back out the door, working on these campaigns in very local areas. Okay, big honor for me, big thrill for me. I get to bring in Julia Quinn, our national ambassador. Hi, it is such a pleasure to be with you today.
You too.
I want to do something very formal and read a little bit of a bio, and then I want to spend a little time chatting with you about reading and writing and censorship and libraries and the culture of it all, if that's okay with you. All right, folks, so if you don't know Julia Quinn already, next New York Times bestselling author, best known for her historical romance series Bridgerton, which has captivated readers worldwide and has been adapted into a hit Netflix series produced by Shonda Rhimes. She's a graduate of Harvard and Radcliffe. From what I understand from your bio, and we haven't had this chat, you initially planned to attend medical school, and then and then decided to pursue your passion for writing instead. And I'm not looking for the conversation about med school, but I do want to talk about that passion for writing today.
Okay.
She's written for more than 18 novels, been recognized for her witty dialogue, rich character development, and her ability to blend romance with social commentary. And as I mentioned before, she's honoring us this year, serving as the national ambassador for EveryLibrary, where she advocates for libraries and the right to read. When you came on board, Julia, you said, and we were able to put this out in the old internet. You said, "Our right to read is fiercely under attack, and I cannot sit on the sidelines. As a kid, I visited the library every week, and as an adult, I plan to advocate for them every day. I'm honored to be an ambassador for EveryLibrary." And then you went on to name check Walter Cronkite, and you said his famous quote, "Whatever the cost of our libraries, the price is cheap compared to that of an ignorant nation."
Yes.
Yeah.
That was one of those quotes there's no way I could improve upon. So I just said, I'm just putting him in there.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, so you're on the road right now. You're doing bookstores. You're doing libraries. I mean, What are you seeing around the country right now when you're out there with libraries about how reading is? I mean, reading's under attack. Censorship is happening. I know that you're meeting a lot of wonderful fans. What are you hearing?
Well, when I'm actually doing a library visit, I mean, the people who are coming tend to be, they're all people who feel the same way I do. You just don't find people who are trying to ban books coming to library events with me. So the way I see it, everybody is, on the right side of history with this, but we know that's not true. And I do see let me back up, where I see the people who are wanting to ban books or perhaps questioning the whole issue. is more online. When I bring up something online, I tend to do that. I'm on Facebook and Instagram, and I tend to do it more on Facebook because it's easier to post links. And so I link to various stories. And most people who comment, believe the book banning is wrong, and they may, just be there to cheer me on. They may be there just to agree, or they may have an example of something that's happening in their lives. But sometimes people do get on, and sometimes they're, whether they mean to be trolls or not, they act kind of trollish. And sometimes it's just people say, well, but what about this? And you can see how, some of the ideas, or I don't want to call them ideas because I feel like that is giving them too much credence, but some of the things that the book banners say might on the surface seem a little reasonable. And how, people can say like, well, but we don't want books about, highly sexualized things going into the hands of young children or something, and it's like, okay, well, since you have to kind of back up and explain, well, let's parse this out. Nobody's putting books that are highly sexualized in elementary school things. No. And let's see what people are defining as highly sexualized. If somebody's saying something, a book that just mentions that somebody has gay parents, that is not a highly sexualized book. And calling it that is an insult to everybody's intelligence, but also an example of what you say is erasure. So, the other side, for the lack of a better term, is simplifying these cases, or, lumping things in under very hot button terms that make it seem reasonable. And so, that's where I'm trying to do the work, saying, hey, let's look at it this way. And sometimes I think we are getting through to people. And one of the things I've learned about having discussions like this online, where I do choose to interact with the person, sometimes I don't, sometimes I let my readers do it. Sometimes it's just not worth it, but I pick and choose very carefully. And there are times when it does make sense to respond. And often you have to realize, I may be responding to this person. That's not the person I'm trying to convince.
Yes.
Because I'm never going to convince that person.
No.
Or certainly not in this conversation. Something much more personal is going to have to happen to them to convince them. I'm trying to convince the people who are all silently reading along.
Well, the unanswered question is always difficult to leave hanging out there. But the unanswered troll, I mean, they lack some civility and decorum, of course, but the unanswered troll means that the troll's right. And I appreciate your courage, honestly, because engaging those things there's no filter, in that social media space. There's no barrier. But I appreciate your courage in answering that.
Well, that's why when I say I do pick and choose them carefully, I try to choose somebody who has got some sort of hook in there where I feel I can answer them with some sort of, treat them with dignity, saying like, hey, it's really good that you care about this, but blah, 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 blah. There are some people you just can't respond to.
No, of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Well, when you did us the honor of agreeing to be our national ambassador, you also talked a lot about your love for libraries and the embrace of libraries. Can I ask you some personal questions about, your own libraries as part of your own early childhood, your own coming up, like your reading habits, memorable library experience? I mean, how did libraries live how did you live in libraries a little bit?
So I grew up in Ridgefield, Connecticut, which is a town about an hour and a half away out of New York City. My family, Ridgefield's a fairly affluent town. My family at the time was not very affluent. My parents were divorced. We were one of the only divorced families, and we lived in like this condo complex. Everyone else is in these houses with acre zoning, and, we're in the condo complex, and we walked to school, but the library was on the way. So on the way home, at least once a week, I would stop in the public library to get books because I love to read, and we didn't have enough money to buy lots of books. And also, now that I think about it, there wasn't really a bookstore. Maybe there was a bookstore, but there weren't that many bookstores.
Yeah, but you weren't going to the mall for that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there wasn't a mall at that time either, but yeah, that was later. So, that was the way to get books. And I, would go in, and I had a library card, and I did not need a parent to go with me. and I knew where the kids section was. And of course, it is curated by librarians who are trained in book curation, just to sort of draw that back to something today, as opposed to, just some random person who says, I don't like this book. These are people who, they're trained, they know what's appropriate. And so I would go in the kids section where things, were appropriate. And I remember for the longest time I was doing the B is for Betsy series by Carolyn Haywood. I don't know if you know that.
I don't, but that's okay.
I was old fashioned even when I was reading it.
Is that right?
And I eventually graduated to, Victoria Holt and Jean Plaidy. I would go to, and I think those were in the adult section. I would go and find it, and I would just, bring back my books and get the other books. And I had a big, heavy backpack, but that was my exercise, I guess.
Oh, I love it. I absolutely love it. There's times where somebody has a librarian story, and sometimes people have a library story, and I don't know if there's a librarian necessarily in your life, but having the access like that is an extraordinary moment, especially for a kid coming up in some hard times.
Yeah, no, it was a library story more than, I can't remember a specific librarian.
That's okay.
But on the other hand, I wasn't the kid who needed to be encouraged.
You were pretty voracious, huh?
Oh yeah. I think a lot of the people who had like that librarian story are the kids who needed like a little push or encouragement, or to be shown like, I knew about books. I had already bought into, I was already on board. I just, and I knew how to work a card cap. I knew how to do all that. And I was just like, let me loose. That's what I needed.
The reading that you did it lead to you being a writer? I mean, I don't mean to call back to medical school, but like, what was that moment where you said to yourself, I have a story to tell?
Actually, when I was 13, I was out in California with my dad because we spent the summers out there, and I was reading Sweet Dreams books, which are not Sweet Valley High.
Oh yeah, okay.
Rest in peace, Francine Pascal, who just passed away. But very similar. It was like, they weren't a long series. It's sort of like the Harlequin romance of teens. So each book is independent, but it's in the series you could buy, and you knew you were getting a romance, and I loved them. Yeah. And that's what I was reading over the summer. And in fact, I was getting them from the library out near where he lived in Southern California. And, my dad is or was, I should say, quite intellectual. And he's looking at this being like, I don't know. And, but he's also not the type of person to ever tell me you can't read that. So he said, well, what is it you like about these? What do you, and so I said, well, they're fun. I'm enjoying. He says, well, that's important, but maybe you should also be reading something, improving or whatever. And I said, well, these are improving. And he said, okay, well, how? And I said, oh, vocabulary words. I'm, okay. He said, well, can you show me a vocabulary word in this book that you didn't already know? And I could not. I was saying, these books had a lot to recommend for them, but a robust vocabulary was not one of them. So I had to think quickly, and I said, it's research, because I'm going to write one. And
wow.
He said, okay, that's great. And this was 1983, and we were one of the only households in America that had a computer at that time. And so he said, you can have the computer tonight. And he took me out to his office and sat me down in front of his Osborne computer with a screen about that big, black with the blinking green cursor, using WordStar. I don't know if anybody remembers WordStar. And he said, we'll see you soon. And he just put me in the office and went back and started watching TV.
Oh man, your dad called your bluff.
Oh, he totally called my bluff. But then I did it. And he said, he thought for sure I'd be got back in half an hour saying, okay, give me the Dostoevsky. I'll read what you want. But I didn't. I was out there for hours, and he finally poked in, and I'm like, I've written 2 chapters.
No kidding.
Yeah. And over that summer and this next summer, I wrote an entire teen romance called Standing Ovation, which was, very much wishful thinking on my part. It had a heroine, a lot like me, but except that she actually got the boyfriend, which I never did at the time. And I sent it off to the publishing house that did the Sweet Dreams books. And I did a very professional job. I researched at the library, the Writer's
Mhm.
Digest books, how do you do this? And I sent it with my self-addressed stamped envelope. And I wrote a very good cover letter where I said, I think you'll find that since I'm 16 years old or however old I was at that time,
Mhm.
that this is very authentic, blah, 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 blah. And they rejected me so fast that I know for a fact they didn't read it, because
Okay.
I'm sure somebody looked at the cover letter and said, oh, it's a teenager.
Yeah.
Because I know how New York works now, or New York publishing, and
Mhm.
nobody gets rejected in under 2 weeks from the slush pile.
Okay.
It doesn't happen. They just don't get to you that fast. So that happened. And then I never did anything more, to be honest, about it. I should have, but I didn't. I didn't know who else to send it to. I
Mhm.
had other things going on, and that was that. But I did use it to, I'm pretty sure that's how I got into Harvard. Because when
Mhm.
you had to write your essay, there was a section where it said, list your 10 favorite books, or talk about one book that's been the most important to you. And so I talked about the book I wrote.
Mhm.
And I'm convinced that's how I got in, because it was the only thing about me that was
That's
different
so
and unique.
funny. Because that's,
Yeah.
I think, how just as that's how I think I got into college too. I'd been
Oh, yeah.
rejected. I'd been rejected at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign's English as an English major, and then I went to the theater department because really that was where my heart was. I was already doing theater in high school, and I had happened to have written the half of the one act, for high school, and I sent it to them, and they're like, "Well, you might as well come in."
Oh, that's great.
It was, yeah, yeah. You're
Yeah.
nervy though, sending your first book off to a publishing house in New York right when you're 16 years old. I admire that.
Well, I still think they made a mistake. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
and it's funny is that I have it, and it was all dot matrix. I had to like scan it in and fix it,
Mhm,
but I have it, and it's not suitable for publication now. I
mhm.
mean, it's not just that it's dated in terms of, there are no cell phones or whatever, but it's just there's no market for this type of teen romance. It's not what's being published. It's not what people want to read now.
Mhm, mhm.
But you can absolutely tell it's me.
Yeah.
If you
That's
if you read my books, you can see my voice in there. I was stunned when I saw that.
that's a beautiful, not keepsake, that sounds like it's, patting it on its head. That's a beautiful little moment, like a touchstone for yourself. That's really
Yeah.
cool. Yeah.
And people ask me like, "Oh, would you put this out?" And I don't know. I'm not, there's some people say, "Oh, my first book, that will
Well,
never see the light of day." Maybe if I can find a way to do it, maybe I will, and just say like, "Hey, this
so
is what I wrote when I was a teenager."
so, I'm gonna pitch you the Wu-Tang Clan idea then. Like there's one copy of it, that's out there. It's a unique, and we auction it off, okay?
I don't know about that.
Okay, never mind. I thought it was a good idea. Yeah. So, the nerve that you have as a very young writer,
Mhm.
your characters in Bridgerton are I mean, hearing that story from you, I'm like, okay, that's why those characters are so nervy.
Mhm.
There's a sense of agency that you bring to the folks you write about, and it's sometimes discovered, through the run of a book.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's right there at the beginning. They're I mean, heck, they're titled with a sense of agency.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the character development, the inspirations for that. I mean, as a 16-year-old, you had a story in you. You've had 18 published now since then.
Oh, more
How
than
do you?
that.
Oh, I'm sorry. How
That's
do
okay.
you?
That's okay.
Yeah, yeah. That was my bio. I got to get the update from your publisher. The
Oh, I think it's 18 New York Times bestsellers, if I could pat myself.
100% you can do that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
There were but that goes to the fact that like I was not an overnight success. I
Mhm,
had written a number of books before I hit the New York Times list. And
mhm.
I always tell people now, like it wasn't even until my 6th book that I managed to get an endorsement quote from another author.
Yeah.
It was a slow moving time.
Mhm.
I did it the long, slow way.
No, there's a craft to that. I mean, what's your process right now? You sitting down at the old teletype machine and doing the dot matrix, or like how do you wake up in the morning and put that creativity to work?
Well, I'll be honest. I wake up in the morning and I usually think of all the ways I can avoid working.
Yeah.
I'm not the most conscientious of writers. I always end up taking way too much time between books, and to be honest with you, right now I'm taking an extended break
Mhm,
um, for a number of reasons. One of which is that at least, especially this election year, I've been leaning into the political advocacy
mhm,
for EveryLibrary, for reproductive rights, for a lot of
mhm,
things. So I've just been really focusing on that, and also just some family issues. But when I am writing, I do an outline, or I hate the word outline. It seems much more structured than what I do, but it's a summary. And I started doing that because, to be completely frank, because it was required in my contract.
Oh, interesting.
It was, yeah. The first couple books, I don't think I did that. I just kind of went. And then I think with my third book, they're like, well, you need an outline. So it was mostly written. So I kind of wrote it based on what I already had. And it's like, well, here you go. Because I had to in order to get paid, because I get paid portions, some of it is on the, acceptance of this outline. And so I started doing that. And I am at the point in my career where I'm sure if I went to my publisher and said, I no longer wish to have, part of my payment dependent on an outline, they would acquiesce. But it has become a really important part of my process. So I might as well keep it in. And it started out being mostly just the plot, saying, okay, this is what happens. They meet this and this and this and this. And around The Duke and I, which is the first book of the Bridgerton series, I made a change. Actually, it was with that book I made a change. And I don't think it was because it was the Bridgerton series. That's when it happened. I started making the outlines more characterization centered. So it opens with really a history of the characters, everything about them that happens before page 1. And a lot of things that may be listed in there never even make it into the book. But because I know it, I'm able to create a more three-dimensional character, I think, because it just sort of seeps into everything. And then once I kind of have all that, then it's, okay, this is, the meet cute or not cute or whatever. And this is the conflict. And then this happens, this, all that stuff. And it can be very, very specific down to actual pieces of dialogue, because if you think of a piece of dialogue while you're writing that outline, you better write it down then, because you will not remember it later. And it can be as vague as literally saying things happen. Okay. Because, sometimes you're like writing the outline and you need to get started. You're like, I have no idea how we're going to get from here to here, but we will. And eventually they will get here. And
I've been talking to a lot of writers. We do EveryLibrary Live events every so often. This whole week, I've had the privilege of talking to some other folks. And what you're describing here sounds more like an actor, quite honestly. There's a certain dramaturge quality to what you're doing. How did we get here? How do we get to just before the curtain came up? Where's my life? And having to do that for one character as somebody who's on stage, somebody who's before the camera, versus having to do it for so many different characters, or for even entire set pieces like that. That's a lot. That's a heavy lift.
I never thought about it that way. I'm really only doing it for the two main characters. So
okay.
But even then, but yeah.
That's a really interesting. So you're setting for the Bridgerton series, of course, is the Regency period. I don't know if you're a history nerd or if something grabbed you, if there was somebody that you read. I mean, the Regency period is Jane Austen's, the Shelleys, it's Keith. I mean, there's a lot of different cultural mammoth. Did you come to that time of history because of the genre, or because of the time of history, or what's your journey there?
It was what I like to read.
Yeah.
That simple. There was a very specific, it still is, but not quite in the same way, specific genre of romance called Regency romance, which is actually not the same as what I do, which is Regency historical romance. So Regency historical romance, they're a certain length, they're set in the Regency, they have intimate scenes. So they're very much like any other historical romance, except they're set in the Regency. But there was, and it doesn't really exist so much today, this little genre that was basically created by Georgette Heyer. I don't know if you're familiar with her, which is shorter, it's sweeter, there's no sex, and it's very much comedy manners. And I was reading a lot of those and a lot of Regency historical romance by authors like Judith McNaught and Julie Garwood and Lisa Kleypas and Amanda Quick. And I was reading these all when I was in college, and it was what I read for fun. And so I think it just makes sense that when it came time to write a book, I was just like, I'm gonna do what I like to read. Why not?
Yeah,
I like it. And so I think I actually started out in that period. I wouldn't call myself a history nerd, mainly because I know history nerds.
Okay.
And
that's fair. Yeah.
I don't qualify based on that.
Yeah.
but
It's
I'm interested in
the
history.
difference between watching a couple of baseball games and talking to somebody who's a real fan. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Well, I'm beyond a couple baseball games, but
Yeah.
yeah, but I'm not. I'm
You like
not.
going to the ball. You like going to the ballpark. You know.
I
Yeah.
like eating the hot dogs.
Yeah.
Uh,
Right.
but yeah, I do very much enjoy the research part of it, though. Finding out these little things to kind of drop in and pepper in, and which is why I think my books might feel more accessible for some people, because they're not history nerd books. They're not steeped in history,
Mhm.
but they are. There's all sorts of little things that are. I almost like to sneak the details in.
Mhm.
And one of the things I tell people who ask about my writing is that you will almost never find a sentence in my books where the entire sentence is devoted to description. It's almost always snuck in as part of something. It's just, I'm not interested in doing that heavy description. And I read authors who do it wonderfully and I enjoy
Mhm.
reading it, but it's not what I do. And so I like sneaking those little things in there.
Well, I mean, the the Jane Austen frame of mind about quick wit, the looking at the long game of the conversation, the the conversations that happen in different ways of power and equity, like nobody wants to know what color the wallpaper was in that kind of a context.
Yeah, I don't necessarily, but some people do. And it's always so funny when I read just read comments that readers make. They're like, "Oh, you make me feel it's there. It's so descriptive. It's so." I'm like, "Really? Like, have you
Mhm.
read these other authors? They're way more descriptive than I am." But in some ways, I think it has made me kind of a good author to adapt to television, or at least from the author standpoint, because everyone's always saying, "Does it look like you thought it would look?" And I say, "No, because I didn't see it. I'm
It's
not a visual author." And
Mhm.
if you read my books knowing that, you'll see, oh, I totally see that she's not a visual author. I mean, I might tell you what hair color the character has, but I don't describe, in their eyes, but I don't describe their face super closely.
Mhm.
I rarely describe the details on a dress. I'll be like, oh, what color should I make this dress? All right, blue satin. I don't know.
Mhm.
Um, I'll mention, the green drawing room, but, won't be in detail. And so,
Mhm.
I'm as delighted and surprised by, or I guess, I don't know if surprise is the right word, but by the visual aspect of Bridgerton, the television series, as anyone else. I mean, because that's something I could never dream up. I mean, I could.
Oh, the set dressings alone are worthy of a museum piece. I
Oh,
mean, they're
it's
gorgeous.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's unbelievable. I
The,
mean,
the costumes. Let's talk about the dress.
take it from someone who has gotten to go to the set. It is unbelievable. You just walk around like,
That's
and I remember when I
amazing.
first got to go, texting my husband, because I actually grew up a little bit sort of tangential to Hollywood. I'll brag for a minute. My cousin was on the Waltons, so I used to
Oh
go.
wow.
She was, yeah. My cousin is Cammie Cotler, who played the littlest Walton Elizabeth. So
Okay. Yeah.
the older among our viewers will know who I'm talking about. So I would get, as growing up, I would get to go to a television set and see things, and I knew a little bit about it. And I remember texting my husband going, "This is not a low budget thing." Because we didn't know, I'm
Yeah.
saying, like, they did not spare expense. The production values on this is unbelievable. It was
Yeah.
really incredible.
Well, it's sparked a lot of people's. I mean, you spark a lot of joy in people with these stories, and
Thank
the
you.
fact that it's been able to get onto the screen like that too. There's a million questions I could ask you about. What's it like to see it up there, and what are the particular differences and stuff. But what I want to try and close with today is really a conversation about. I mean, your themes in those books could be a real target, these days. I mean, you're talking, the television series has a very diverse cast.
Mhm.
The books themselves talk about themes of love and sexuality and personal freedom. These are themes that are being targeted all the time by book banners and censors. And there's always that discomfort about how, should the 13-year-old who stops at the library on the way home have access to that, so where do you see romance as a genre in this broader cultural context? I mean, and not to call back to the Regency too much, but I mean, the sexual repression and sexual liberty, the social inequities that come between men and women. I mean, you're playing it out again in a time that, weirdly enough, has so many of those same fraught themes.
Yeah. I do want to say I have not personally been subject to or book challenges, my
Mhm,
books that I'm aware of. I'm sure, there's somebody out there, calling them filth, but,
mhm,
and I think, that's for a couple of reasons. I think one, the books are clearly for adults.
mhm.
And as I said, we have trained librarians. They're not going to put it in the kids section.
No.
So, I think more of what is out there getting attacked, or, people are using, the banner of protect our children to stop these books from coming through. And so, apparently the kids are already protected from my stuff. So I'm not under attack that way. But I do
Mhm,
feel very strongly that just because I'm not under attack doesn't mean I can stand on the sidelines.
mhm.
It's, I
Well, I mean, another dear friend of EveryLibraries is Nora Roberts,
Mhm.
and when you look at the way that she's been put under the microscope and put up on a hit list, I mean, for books to be challenged and censored, I mean, the genre does attract that kind of attention, and I don't know if that's necessarily fair because so much of what is being attacked directly as literature is being attacked by people who haven't even read it.
Yeah. Well, I've often said, and this is before book banning really kind of came up as a rise, on the rise.
Mhm.
You know, People who do attack romance aren't people who read it. And I'm always like, really, you're going to argue against a book that like promotes a long-term monogamous relationship between two consenting adults? Really?
Right.
That's what you're fighting just because they have sex? And these
Hmm.
are the same people who don't seem to think violence is a problem, until like they're looking for an excuse for somebody who shoots something. They're like, it's the video games. Um, but I guess getting back to your initial question, about the themes in the books, I I also think another reason I've been able maybe to sneak through without catching the ire of people is that the books that I have written, the characters are white. On the television screen, they're not. And I think
Hmm.
that's great. I love that
Hmm.
they've been able to expand the universe in a way that I think I myself was not able to do, or at least I couldn't do it as well.
Sure.
For a number of reasons, including the fact that, just like you said, we're not going to describe the wallpaper. So if I'm describing two people walking down the street, I'm not going to describe all the people walking down the street, right? I may say they brushed up against somebody, but I'm not necessarily going to describe all these other people. But in the world of Bridgerton, our two characters are walking down the street and you just see the world as it is, with people of all different races and abilities and sexualities and things like that, which is wonderful. So the visual aspect helps open it in a great way. And also the collaborative aspect of, the writer's room isn't just one person like me. It
Hmm.
is this incredibly diverse group of people who can bring in wonderful aspects and wonderful bits of history and culture. So there is that. But also, I am writing about a time really before the rise of all these things. So I'm not necessarily writing about the women who changed the world. I'm writing about the women who paved the way for somebody else to change the world, because that's just really what's appropriate for that time period. And one book where I'm proud of the way I did that is actually, it's called First Comes Scandal, which is the last of the Rokesby books, which is the Bridgerton prequels. So the heroine is
Hmm.
actually the aunt of the Bridgertons we know and love. And she has been cast out of society because some dude tried to elope with her against her will. And in there, she has never questioned how her society works before, but now she's thinking to herself, like, wait 1 second. How come I'm the one who's in trouble here? I didn't do anything. At one point, she's in like, I got away from him. They should be like having a parade for me. And yet and so it's really kind of showing people coming to these awarenesses, but it's done in a way that isn't so in your face. And so I think that's why it's kind of slipped under the radar. So what is interesting is where I am getting attacked is by people who are upset about the changes to the books in the show.
Yeah.
Recently, there was a big reveal at the end of season 3 was that a character who in the books is named Michael is now Michaela, which is going to mean that what was a heterosexual relationship is going to be a gay relationship.
Yes.
And oh my gosh, I knew that there was going to be an uproar. I was not prepared for the level of personal vitriol hurled at me. Saying you're a sellout, you're just so woke. And I'm like, I'm woke. I'm okay with being woke. But
yeah, I believe there were gay people and queer people back in the 1811s.
There were. I mean, to be fair, it was a very difficult time to be gay and queer.
Yes.
And that is something that the show has chosen to not change as much as, they've made it sort of this racism has kind of disappeared for these people, but homophobia and prejudice against gays has not. So it will be interesting how it will be addressed. I don't think it's going to suddenly be like, oh, they get to get married. Although I haven't seen the script, so I couldn't tell you. But or the changing, when it was first announced that Simon Bassett was going to be played by a Black actor, there was a bit of an uproar, although that did die off, so I'm hoping this will die off when they see how wonderful the actresses, portraying that relationship are. But that's where people are coming after me.
That's so interesting. I'm going to want to check back in with you after the season, hits and see where, hopefully your social media environment will be a little more demure than it has been already. But I think you're right.
I'm so not into that demure and mindful thing. I don't understand it. I don't want to be demure and mindful. I'm out here fighting for freedom.
I get up in the morning and we put up an anti-censorship, anti-discrimination campaign. You gotta go. You gotta fight. So
yeah. And what you just said there, that's a promise that we're going to hang out for a while because that season's not coming up for a few years. So
good. We'll have a good time.
So we are going to be friends for a while now.
Thank you, Julia. You've been a great friend to EveryLibrary already. I'm very grateful to you. Folks, I got about 90 more minutes of questions for Julia Quinn. I know that you have some as well. Julia, you've been very generous with your time already today. And tonight, we're going to do a Instagram takeover. You're doing an Instagram takeover with us. It's at @EveryLibrary_. That's us. You already know, folks, it's at Julia Quinn Author on Instagram. So you're going to be on there for a little while. It's an AMA. I'm jealous that they're going to get a chance to have that kind of dialogue with you tonight some more. So,
yep. Book questions are welcome. Show questions are welcome if I can answer the show questions. But yeah,
it'd be cool to hang out with some people. So
I'm excited. Yeah. I've actually never done this before.
Oh, seriously?
So yeah, this is my first. I've done an AMA, but not an Instagram takeover. At least that I can recall.
I gotta be honest with you, neither were we. So let's fly by the seat of our pants together. Julia Quinn, thank you so much for your time today. Folks, and I just want to do a quick commercial. We're doing this in order to have these kind of great discussions, I think, about reading and writing and about the joy of it all. But, it's Banned Books Week. I got to remind you that if you are, like we both are, our national ambassador and me, the executive director, are in EveryLibrary interested in seeing change happen, please help us help those libraries that are in crisis, those school districts that are in crisis. Again, it's everylibrary.org/2024 for a donation. In the meantime, Julia, I'm going to see you tonight.
I'll be there.
Good to be with you today. Bye-bye.
Bye.